welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we are going to be looking into a common discussion point and something that one of my colleagues brought up with me at work, who is a health coach as well, and she's a phenomenal coach, but she realizes that I've studied nutrition. She asked me, right, organic, is it better for me or not? And after I discussed it to her, I thought, actually, I should probably do a podcast on this. I think I've covered it in previous podcasts before, but actually having something just specifically on organic versus non-organic food and explaining around what it is, why it might be more expensive, if it's that much more expensive, and whether it's something worth looking into for people. So what is organic, or what does the label actually mean? And as always, I'm based in the UK. My audience predominantly UK. I work with people predominantly in the UK, although I have clients all over the world. I'll be sort of referring to UK standards. So in the UK, organic certification is overseen by the Department for Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, so DEFRA, something that you probably heard of, talked about in the news every now and then. We're talking about budgets in the government. DEFRA is something that is often discussed. And in order to meet the organic label or reach their standards, the produce must adhere to strict regulations. There are lots of them, but a few that sort of sprung to mind that will hopefully give you a bit of an overview of what's expected. So there's limitations on the pesticides that can be used, so no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. That doesn't mean that they can't use any pesticides or fertilizers. There's just limits or standards around which ones they can use, and it's to help with minimizing the environmental impact. But it often might require an alternative, maybe more labor intensive for the farmers, for example, where maybe they would spray something usually to get rid of a certain pest, and it might require a different approach, different pesticide potentially, or a completely different approach that might be more labor intensive. So that's for weeds and pest control, and that might result in a higher cost. Another thing is around animal welfare. So organic livestock must have access to outdoor space, which some sort of livestock, when they're not organic, might not have access to, and their diet must be quite specifically adhered to around what can be within the foods, regards to antibiotics and things like that. Again, just because organic doesn't mean that there won't be certain things that are within the foods. It's not black or white. They'll just have regulations around that. Another thing, and last on the list, was soil health. So organic farming practices emphasize soil fertility and biodiversity, promoting sustainable agricultural system. So it's just about intensive farming, what can be within the soil, actually looking at the wider environment, which is quite good. So rather than just focusing on what is the most amount of yield I can get for this crop, it's actually having a look at the longevity and the surrounding area that's not negatively impacted, and looking at it as a whole system rather than a closed system, which is quite good. So I hope that's giving you a bit more an idea of what organic is versus what organic isn't. It doesn't mean that it's a special magical product. It just means that there's certain things, in order for it to be labelled organic, they have to adhere to. So as I mentioned, there is usually a price increase when we're looking at organic products versus non-organic alternatives. So within the UK, that can be from anywhere from 20% to 90% more expensive than non-organic counterparts. This price really usually depends on the specific product. So I'll go through a few examples in a minute, and the retailer as well, but they do vary. So this is just something that I've noticed recently. I've noted down some recent numbers, just give you an idea. So if we're looking at organic apples in the UK, they are £1.75 per kilo versus non-organic, which is £1.20 per kilo, and that's about a 45% difference. If we're looking at bananas, organic is £1.40 a kilo, non-organic bananas are 90p per kilo, again 55% difference in price. Quickly looking at example around chicken breasts, organic chicken breasts are £12 per kilo, non-organic chicken breasts are £8 per kilo. And last but not least, milk is around twice the price of non-organic milk. So organic versus non-organic is usually twice the price. So huge variation in differences there. We're looking at around 45 to 55% on general, but milk obviously going twice the amount. So why might that be? So we sort of touched on a few of these already, but we'll go into a bit more depth. Lower yields is one of the biggest ones. As I've said, with less intensive approaches, we're probably not going to get as much reward or return on investment. So organic farming generally produces a smaller crop yield compared to conventional methods due to the reliance on more natural pest control and soil management techniques. So that is something per unit, probably more effort is going in for less back. Therefore, the farmer and the process in general means that they're probably going to want more per unit. Another thing as well is increased labour costs. So with the absence of more synthetic or some options, this means that potentially there's going to be more manual labour, there's going to be more labour intensive methods with regards to weed and pest control, which again sort of drives up the cost of production. So again, that's another reason why it might be more expensive. Last but not least, the actual certification itself will cost a fee, I imagine. I don't know what that amount is, but they're not probably going to be running it for free. So obtaining and maintaining organic certification involves inspections and fees, and that again is sort of leaked into the price as well. So whilst you'll probably find out my opinion in a minute around whether I think it's worthwhile or not, there's reasons for it being that much, and often we sort of think about the end buyer perspective of food and the costs, which are high at the moment, but actually there's someone at the other end who's put a lot of effort into that side. And if we are looking at, and Clarkson's Farm's done a great sort of service to the farming community, and sort of giving us a peek behind the curtain of what farming is actually like and how much they get for a lot of effort. There's probably a bit of an argument for potentially those prices, but I think as a consumer, often our frustrations are that whilst our prices are increasing, the producer or the farmer isn't seeing the benefits of that, and actually it's the middleman that's making a lot more money. But that's an argument for another day. So after that, obviously as a nutritionist and working with people, the reason that people often choose organic is because they feel it's healthier. There is a few other reasons around sort of ethical, environmental sort of aspects that people might want to have a look at. But from my side, from the biggest thing that people often think is that they choose organic because it is healthier. And I've picked a fair few studies here to sort of go through and have a look through to hopefully display my point and the reasons why I potentially don't think that organic is something that we need to all be aspiring to necessarily. So a 2012 systematic review and meta-analysis reviewed 344 studies comparing the compositional differences between organic and non-organic conventional crops. They found that there was no significant difference in most nutrients, including vitamin C, beta-carotene, calcium, magnesium, and iron. But they did find higher levels in phosphorus and total polyphenol content in organic produce. So from that study alone, a lot of the nutrients that we feel that might be higher in a lot of these crops, probably there was no significant difference. However, the trend seems to be that there are a few that actually, with the reduction or being more selective in pesticides, polyphenol content and phosphorus content might be higher on average across the board. A 2009 study reviewed 17 studies comparing nutrient content of organic versus conventionally grown fruits, vegetables and grains. Again, they found no significant difference in protein, fat, carbohydrate, fibre, vitamin C, iron or calcium content. Again, across the board, no significant difference. A 2017 study reviewed 230 studies comparing organic and conventional food. The review concluded that while some studies showed minor differences in certain nutrients, the overall evidence suggests limited practical significance for human health. And again, that's what we're looking at. People making these choices based on potential health outcomes and actually not being rewarded for that. And last but not least, a 2016 meta-analysis reviewed 178 studies, found limited evidence for significant differences in nutrient content between organic and conventional produce. So yes, that might sound a bit boring to you all, but essentially those papers have reviewed a lot of studies. And when we look at sort of the evidence hierarchies, systematic reviews and meta-analysis are the top ones, where they have very strict criteria where they say, we want to assess this one thing. What studies have been done in that area? They're very selective with which ones they do, so it's got to fit certain criteria on potentially regions. It might be in the way that the studies were actually undertaken, whether they were robust enough. And then cleverly, very cleverly, put it all together so they can assess them across the plane and see what on average happens and what the effect size is, or how impactful that one variable or whatever. So it would be conventional or non-organic versus organic. What's that singular difference there across the board? And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any benefits to health outcomes or in nutrient profiles or nutrient contents. So hopefully that's answered the question, that is it healthier or not? Not necessarily. However, there may be some things that we want to consider with that. As I've said, to meet the organic guidelines, there's certain aspects that that the farmer must undertake in order to reach that organic level. Pesticides is the first one. I feel like this is often something that is quite triggering for a lot of people and overplayed, that actually that organic has no pesticides versus non-organic has loads of pesticides, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just they're not allowed to use certain pesticides in organic farming. And pesticides doesn't necessarily mean that it's having a negative impact on health, or it's damaging to the product, or it's making it less higher in quality, as we've seen from the nutrient content. So again, that's not anything to worry about. The other two areas would be something that I feel that people would have this where it sort of falls into the ethical elements. Animal welfare. And this doesn't mean that non-organic food has terrible animal welfare, but it means that they don't have to have a certain level, potentially. People might meet that level and not choose to be registered organic, and that's completely fine. But organic gives people that peace of mind that the animal that they're eating, the process that it's had potentially a better standard of living, has lived a life, and has potentially had a better quality of life compared to non-organic. That is something to consider, and again, it sort of depends on how people feel about that. And last but not least is the soil health. Intensive farming is something that currently there's murmurs around it causing problems currently, which is probably only going to get worse as the population of the earth grows and the food demand increases with that, and we sort of farm more intensively on these soils. The nutrient quality of those soils potentially decreasing, and this is where organic farming, in my eyes, is probably a bit better, that it sort of ensures that we have soil fertility and biodiversity within there, and also how that impacts on the local ecosystem as well. So it's not necessarily just thinking about food and thinking about future crops, but also the wildlife and nature around that farming, that region, being protected a bit better. So ethically, that might be something that you want to be, that sits better with you, and therefore you want to choose organic as a consequence of that. But however, it does come at a cost, and very aware at the moment, everyone who's feeling the pinch with the economic situation, especially within the UK, food has increased drastically, wages haven't sort of gone in line with that, and food is a huge expense for people. So for us to say that you need to pay for a significant portion of people's weekly food shop, pay between 40 to 50, even double of what you could get the same product for no health benefits, that's a big ask. And often one of the biggest barriers for people choosing to eat healthier or make better food decisions is that they feel they have in their mind that it's really expensive to eat healthy. And this plays into the narrative, the organic aspect and the narrative around organic food plays into that I need to eat organic in order to eat healthily. Therefore, my food bill is going to increase, which I can't afford. Therefore, I'm not going to even try. So that's where this really frustrates me, that we don't have to pay the odds. It's not going to have a negative impact on our health by not choosing organic food. Ethically, it might sit better for people. Environmentally, again, it probably will be better off for us in the future. But I imagine, as humans always do, we get ourselves into this massive hole and we manage to dig ourselves out by the end of it before it becomes too bad. Well, I imagine we'll find a way around that in the future. And there's some interesting research around future movements in proteins that are non-animal based, that again, which I think are hugely needed. I mean, I'm doing a lot of research on that at university. So there's a lot to consider here. But the overall arching theme from my side is that organic doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect, but it also doesn't mean that it's not worth anything. There's some benefits to it, but it might not be the benefits that people often spout about around pesticides and health. Actually, that's not the things that we want to consider. Usually around animal welfare and soil health are the important things in my eyes that are the benefits of organic farming. It's a lot more expensive on the whole. Usually it says between 20 to 90%, but often it's around 50%, maybe double. So again, something to consider, and especially in today's economic climate, it's probably something that is going to fall under the list of, actually, I'd rather get food on the table that I know is going to fall in line with my goals, that isn't going to break the bank, rather than pushing that boundary too far and causing implications further on, especially at the moment. Health-wise, doesn't seem to have any huge health benefits, especially in nutrient content. There's probably a few around polyphenols, phosphorus content that's slightly better, but on the whole, there doesn't seem to be any significant difference. From my perspective, it's down to the individual. If you feel better eating organic food because you know that animal's lived a good life, that you're supporting potentially the environment and the longevity of the environment a bit more, then go for it, but it may come at a cost. Do you need to do it to eat healthily? Definitely not. There's so much more that we can focus on that I'd suggest with a patient sitting in front of me or a client to improve their health before I'd go, you should be eating organic. That's very far, probably not even on my list, if I'm honest, because it's more, like I said, of a ethical sort of question rather than a health question, in my opinion. So I hope that's given you a lot more food for thought, pardon the pun, and has explained the thoughts and the research around organic versus non-organic foods, and hopefully made you a bit more equipped for when you're next in your food shop, if you're feeling the pressure to buy organic, and hopefully allows you to make a decision that aligns best with your values and goals. So for now, I shall catch you on the next episode. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.